the risk-free asset and this one out there. Again, same question, was that a good choice that I made? Well, here I'm better than my dashed line, obviously, right? So that seems to be an improvement. In the upper right corner, I achieved some things that are higher than the efficient frontier, so that's good. But in the middle, I can find portfolios which are better that are on the efficient frontier again. So if you try out all different portfolios, you end up with one portfolio that you want to combine with the risk-free asset. And that's this one here. Right. So it has a property that it touches, the red line touches the efficient frontier in one single point. In math, we call this a tangent point. So the portfolio has, thus the name, tangency portfolio. And this is a really important portfolio for us, right? Because if you have a risk-free asset available, this is really the only portfolio that you're interested in, right? All the others are now immediately ruled out. You don't care about the efficient frontier anymore, right? Once you can combine this with a risk-free asset, the only portfolio, the only risky portfolio that you ever want to buy is the tangency portfolio. That's the single risky portfolio that you're interested in, right? Because it offers you, quite frankly, the best relationship between return and risk.
Does it mean that if we have less risk, less return, and more risk, more return?
Again, where you want to be on the red line is still a question of how risk averse you are, right? So now you can actually create something absolutely risk-free if you like. So that would depend on kind of what your utility function looks like, and I mentioned it's a little bit difficult. Just to give you a quick kind of glimpse of how this looks like. So utility functions can be drawn in this graphs here like kind of hyperbolas as well, but they're kind of upwards sloping. So this will be a line of kind of the same utility for investors. Right? You draw your specific utility function for your risk preferences, and you see where do I find a point that kind of touches the red line, and that's the portfolio you want.
Is the red line now the risk-free asset plus the risky portfolio?
Yes, it's a mix of the two. Right, so if you want to end up here exactly, then you're 100% risk-free, and this will be 100% the tangency portfolio, 0 risk-free. Now remember our two areas, so this will be the area where you mix risk-free and tangency portfolio positively. And up here, you're buying the tangency portfolio more than 100%, and you borrow money against it. But let's not worry about kind of where exactly you want to end up. It's not so important. What for us is important that this is the only risky portfolio that you care about. It's the tangency portfolio. And interestingly, it's much better than the minimum variance portfolio here, right? So you have a higher return for the same level of risk, right? So that's the portfolio that, for example, as a fund manager, you want to find, and then you want to invest in this, right? Yeah. So basically, this allows you to split up your decisions as an investor into two parts. The first part would be, what is the risky portfolio that I should use? Find the tangency portfolio. That's the one. And the next decision you have is, okay, once I have my tangency portfolio, how do I mix that with the risk-free asset? Right? So these are two independent decisions. The tangency portfolio will be the same for everyone. Right? The second decisions might be different depending on how risk-averse you are. This has a name. It's called two-fund separation. Let me quickly go to the results slides. So this was the result which I mentioned. Two-fund separation. So you can separate your decision into two choices. What is my tangency portfolio? And the second is, how do I mix that with the risk-free asset? I've defined the efficient frontier already for you. Then we've defined the tangency portfolio. So that's where we are. Now, there is a name for this thing here. And you already see it here on the title. So the red line has a specific name because it's kind of so important to us. It's called the capital market line, or CML. So all investors end up to choose portfolios on the capital market line. Right? Now the capital market line has a nice property. So maybe let's look at the ratio of the return and the risk that you have here, which is the slope of the capital market line. So let's compute that. So what's my slope of the capital market line? Well, how can you compute a slope? The slope can be, for example, for a straight line, it's exactly, but usually you can approximate it by taking like how much do you go up when you go to the right by a certain amount. So you take this difference here and divide by this difference here, right? That's kind of the slope of the line. So what's the difference here in returns? So this here is my return of the tangency portfolio minus the risk-free rate. So let's annotate this here. So this is my risk and return of the tangency portfolio. So in the numerator, I have my mu of the tangency portfolio minus the risk-free rate. And I divide by the volatilities, which is the volatility this minus 0. So it's just the sigma here. So it's a ratio of how much return do I get for the unit of risk that I take. This is something that you can theoretically compute for any asset, but the tangency portfolio will be the asset that has the highest slope and the highest difference ratio. That's why you're interested in so much, because it offers the best return offer for a certain risk that you take. And honoring again the people who developed this has a specific name. This is called the Sharpe ratio. And William Sharpe was one of the guys who kind of developed the model that we discuss in the next chapter, but he did this basically based on Markowitz's findings. Right? So the Sharpe ratio is this ratio of excess return above the risk-free rate divided by the volatility of an asset. Again, if you look at kind of how fund managers are kind of evaluated, so usually this is a number that you find in the prospectus and the advertisement material of any mutual fund, right? Because this is kind of showing you how much return do we generate for the risk that we take, right? So you want to present as high Sharpe ratio to your investors as you can. Right? And the Sharpe ratio of the tangency portfolio is the highest Sharpe ratio that you can find, right? So that's why this asset is so important to kind of find. In the next theory, actually, this tangency portfolio will represent, because that's the only portfolio that we want to have, it will represent the demand by investors. Right? So the only portfolio that people want to buy is this one here. So that's why we can say, okay, that's demand. Right? And the next model adds only one condition. It adds supply equals demand. Right? So we're assuming that the market is in an equilibrium, that's how we call it. And then we can derive things about the prices of assets. But Markowitz takes the prices as given, so for him it's not an issue. Okay, so then we have the capital market line. So you see here that this slide is labeled results, right? So this is everything that is a consequence of our assumptions and the logical steps that we did. All right, and then finally here, we have this line, the capital market line, and this thing here in the middle, that's our Sharpe ratio, or highest Sharpe ratio in the economy. So there's a similar ratio if you want to use the beta as the risk measure. You can have the return per unit of beta, that's called the Traynor ratio, but it's kind of less frequently used. Okay, so these are the key results. Let me highlight this one here as well, that we're going to use, and they will carry over in the next theory. Are there any questions regarding the derivation of these results? So actually, actually, I think this is a good point to stop for today. There are 2 slides in this chapter which are rather actually belong to the next chapter. They're in this part here because they are results from this theory already. And we're going to use the formulas to derive the result from the next theory. So I think it makes sense to discuss that in one go. All right? So this picture here is kind of our final picture for the portfolio theory, and the last slide summarizes the results. The other 2 slides will be discussed next week. So if you don't have any questions, let's call it a day and see you next week.
Có học cái gì đâu.